Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to bring my sustaining creativity techniques to performers. And now I've decided to bring it to a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Cynthia Hauk, mindful art facilitator and teacher. Please enjoy Cynthia Hauk. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today I am here with Cynthia Hauk, mindful art teacher. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Mari. I'm happy to be here.
I am so excited to chat with you about mindful art and all of the things that go into it and creativity. And before we get there, if you could share a little bit with our listeners about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I largely share really simple mindfulness and art activities to help people who are busy, overwhelmed, stressed, to first and foremost just relax and also to perhaps spark a bit of something new into their creative practice. So a lot of people I work with are either creatives already or they don't have a creative practice. And in either case, I've found a lot of times people can be very self-critical about what we're making. And so mindfulness and art activities together, I find is a way that is really nice to soften all of that and be kind to ourselves so we can actually enjoy our creative practice. So I teach courses and teacher trainings.
Nice. I love that. And it's so needed in the creative arts and in other arenas as well, not just in the creative arts too. So.
Agreed. Definitely agreed.
Nice. Do you have, I'm sure you yourself have your own creative mindfulness practices that you participate in. What are some of your favorites that you practice?
Yeah, so I think like probably a lot of creatives, my preferences change and they change over time. Sometimes very slowly, it's a 5-year process, and other times it's daily. Lately, I would say I've really been enjoying really simple drawing and breath practices together. So it's a form of a creative meditation. And so I can practice noticing my breath, syncing up with my breath, and then allowing the marks I'm making to just be mirror reflections of that breath. So I find for a lot of people that struggle with sitting on a cushion or quote unquote meditating, that it can feel really accessible. But I've also been doing traveling recently. And so I have a small pocket journal and a pen that I'll take with me. So it's really easy that I can do on the go, and still stay connected to my creative practice and my mindfulness practice. So that's what I've been doing most recently.
Nice. I love that. And so great to remind people that it can be translated to on the go. Like when you're traveling, you don't need a whole studio or some big production to do it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of simple 5-minute practices, as well as really simplistic supplies. I like to say I'm a minimalist at heart. And so any way that I can help remove barriers, that's something that comes up a lot with the students I work with, is that we want to create and then we either don't have the time, or we feel like we don't have the supplies, or we feel like we don't have whatever that skill is. Right. And so what I've found that helps me in my own creative practice is how can I remove some of those barriers so I can still have small touching ends to my creative practice. Yeah. And then sometimes, I work bigger and I have longer practices also, but it's nice for me to not feel like I have to stop completely if I don't have access to a studio and longer periods of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what does it mean to you to be creative?
I love this question. I love it because I feel like it's so probably varied for people's answers, and
Yes.
also that my answer would be different now compared to 5 years ago or 5 years in the future.
Totally.
For me right now, the word that comes to mind around creativity is curiosity. That there's that I can have permission to be curious and experiment and perhaps stretch just beyond where my comfort zones are and try something new and see what happens. And to do that in a way where there's not judgment or rigidity or pressure. And so, yeah, I think curiosity is what comes to mind for me around creativity.
Nice. And I love that permission to stretch beyond your comfort zone. And that is such a big gift to give yourself, to have that permission to flex creativity in that fashion and curiosity too. Where do you think your curiosity or your permission to be curious comes from?
I think it comes from not giving myself permission for so long.
Yeah.
I joke with a lot of my students that I'm a reformed perfectionist, type A, go, 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 very hard on myself, lots of goals, that sort of thing. And I still have lots of goals and intentions, but that's a recipe for burnout, in my opinion. That's at least what happened to me. And so this permission that surfaced was because I desperately needed it. I desperately needed to have a bit more self-compassion and permission around my creativity, but also just how I was showing up in the world. I think what I love most about creative practices is that it's a small mirror reflection of something we're doing in that moment. And it's also how we often show up outside of our page or off the canvas or, outside of your dance studio or whatever type of practice you're exploring. And so the more compassionate I can be with myself in my creativity practice, and the more I give myself permission to explore something, I find that also translates when I'm out in the world, that I can be softer with myself as well as with other people. So yeah, permission emerged and was birthed out of necessity.
As it often is. So I agree, and have had a similar trajectory on that recovering perfectionist strategy, and the go, 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 and having goals, and all of the being burnt out too. It is real. Even though we might love creative arts and being creative, you can still burn out on something you love.
And I think there's something so beautiful around having something, whether that's your art practice or whatever sort of practice or hobby or routine you have, but that you have something that you can return back to, like a home base, a refuge, a place that you can come back home and feel, encouraged and safe, and that you can explore something. And so that's why I really adore mindful art practices. That's my home base.
Yeah. I think it's so great to incorporate the two, because I think oftentimes people just think mindfulness is meditation, is religion, and to say no, we're doing a mindfulness practice while creating something is a very different expression of it. How did you kind of come into that world of mindful art making?
Yeah, so I think I always had a couple of different paths. I was an artist when I was younger, and then I started exploring meditation and yoga towards my early college years. And it was later, again, I think when the world brings you, bumps in the road, we find ways that we can offer ourselves support or seek out support. And so I had them as separate practices for a long time. And then it was only through some struggles in my life that I brought them together. And I was treated for cancer in my late 20s, and I couldn't touch electronics or anything digital, and so I was exploring a intuitive collage practice as well as body scans and breath work, and combining all these different self-care tools that I had had for a long time and combining them together. And there was something that just kind of changed in that moment for me, that I didn't need to keep these different parts separate. And I also found that combining mindfulness and awareness with breath work with my creative practice allowed me to have more space to create. That again, there just wasn't that judgment, because really the root of mindfulness is to be present in the current moment without judgment. And I think there's a big myth, I hear this from my students a lot, around mindfulness or meditation, that they can't clear their thoughts. And it's not about clearing your thoughts. It's just noticing, as, being aware when those thoughts come through, and then returning back to an anchor point. And so for me, my breath used to be my anchor point in meditation. And then with mindful art and meditation, the anchor point becomes the page, or becomes my pen on the page, or becomes noticing the, watercolors mixing together. So it's just an extra focal point. And I love the combination of it. For me and for a lot of people I work with, it just adds something by having them combined.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hearing you talk about it, I'm like, of course they go together so well. And I'm sure many people are thinking the same thing, and actually doing it and putting it together is an art in and of itself. So I think that's great. More people probably need that in their lives right now, in navigating uncertainty and navigating any challenges or roadblocks that they are facing. So I love it. And more people need to do it, for sure. You strike me as someone who can get inspired by lots of things, not only internally in your own experience and your own life, but out in the world. What are some of the things that you are inspired by these days?
I love that question. So a big thing that has been inspiring me recently is improvisational circle singing.
Ooh.
And I discovered it actually at the beginning of COVID. Before then, but I started really consistently doing it through COVID via Zoom with friends. And what I love about it, and why I find it so inspiring, is you're playing vocally with other people, and every time you're singing a song or this vocal orchestra, it's different. You're never going to sing that together again at any other point in time. And so because it's completely improvised and it's new each time, there's huge permission to play, be curious, that you're not making mistakes. Whatever you're exploring is perfect in the moment. And, if it feels like you're tripping on something in that moment, maybe it's going to lead to something else later that's really curious or inspiring, or not. It's just this free for all. It feels very childlike and playful to me. And so that has been my recent inspiration. And so I've sometimes will do mindful doodling, drawing practices while singing, or going back and forth between the two. And so it's just another way to express creatively. So I've been loving that recently.
Nice. That sounds so much fun. And to have like a group of people doing it together, there's that sense of community, and really, it sounds like your community really impacts and influences some of the art that you do and the practices that you do as well. That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of having, I think a lot of artists, especially, at least I've found for myself and chatting with art friends over the years, that it's really easy to feel like you're on an island by yourself.
Yeah.
Especially artists, if you don't have a studio space, with other in a building and you're on your own, it's really easy to create in a silo, or, by yourself. And then I think there also sometimes can be this holding to your chest, like not necessarily showing what you're creating to other people. And so that's something that when I was doing my MFA years ago, I got a really deep appreciation for creating within a community and having other people reflect back, like questions, insights, things that they feel inspired by when they look at something I've created, or just being able to talk about what we did in the process, like share about our process without judgment. I think that is just huge to help as another support for your creativity and your practice.
Yeah. We as creatives, I mean, we as humans need feedback. We aren't living in a bubble alone. And so it can be really helpful to receive the feedback. And do you have in your own life currently, do you surround yourself with a collection of people that will give you, not only the feedback of cheerleading and like what is the phrase is escaping me, but like cheering you on, and people who may question or challenge some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I feel really fortunate that I have a couple of different groups. So I have my improvisational circle singing group friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have an expressive arts group that I'm a part of with peers and other facilitators. And then
Mm-hmm.
I have I call them my accountability buddy groups, but
Yeah.
they're other teachers and solopreneurs as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's from a range of different parts of my creative practice where
Mm-hmm.
I can connect with people who are inspired or curious about similar things. So
Mm-hmm.
we're on, it's like sort of like parallel paths where we can connect. We understand the language, or
Mm-hmm.
our heart resonates in a similar way. And so then there can be more of a conversation or questions around it. Sometimes also, and I do this with my workshops as well, that will there's sometimes I think it's really nice to have space where you can share and talk about what you've made and
Mm-hmm.
not have input, like not have
Yeah.
questions, not have reflections, just have somebody else see and hear what your experience was like. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that can be really powerful as well,
Yeah.
and can feel really connecting, for one person to share and the other person share and just hold space. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I love all of those things. And I'm also an ambivert, so sometimes I just need to stay at home with my cat. So,
Good to know that as well about yourself. Like who you are is so important as a creative human, and how you recharge. I think sometimes we forget that not every creative person, or not every person, is an extrovert.
mm-hmm,
And performing arts aren't the only way we get to be creative, and not all creative expression needs to be shared.
mm-hmm, very
Yeah,
true.
for sure. Well, since you work with so many people in mindful art teaching, I'm sure you come across people who do not think they are creative at all. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you work with them, and how would you encourage them to find creativity in their lives?
Mm-hmm. That does come up a lot. I think so. A couple of different things I usually like to talk about is one, to name it, that that person isn't alone, that that's a really common feeling,
Mm-hmm.
to either not feel creative, or even if you do feel creative, to then judge whatever it is you're making,
Right.
or judge yourself to the point where then you're not making anything at all. It just stops you from beginning, is really
Yeah.
common.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to just, it's like the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. So I like to just name that. And also sometimes I'll share experiences, moments where I've had that as well. And I've been an artist and a creative for a really long time, and that still crops up for me
Yeah.
frequently. It's, it's just part of the practice. And and then also with that, I think that's why with mindful art activities, I love the safety of the container, that you can try these small experiments
Mm-hmm.
without pressure of the final product. So a big thing with mindful art is the focus is on the process, that you don't have to do anything right or wrong. There's invitations and
Mm-hmm.
prompts and things you can try, and you can also do something completely different. You might be surprised by whatever it is. And
Mm-hmm.
so I like that sort of swimming in the unknown waters together,
Yeah.
and just knowing that it's okay. And also, I like to usually name that might feel a little bit uncomfortable. And it's like, going to the gym and building a muscle. Like, if you're
Yeah.
not used to going to the gym, you might feel super uncomfortable when you're first there. And then the more you go there, or maybe it's, a sweet little forest park by your house or something,
Mm-hmm.
the more that we run that groove and continue that path, it becomes our space, you know, and then we can kind of drop in and feel more comfortable. But it's a practice. I think I love that word for these activities.
Yeah.
And I return back to that a lot.
Nice. I appreciate that creativity is a practice too, that it's something that we get to flex and continue to come back to. It's not the perfect thing. It's the ever changing thing that will look different for you and me on any given day. And normalizing that, I think, is what I'm hearing, that you do a lot of normalizing for students, that, yeah, it's okay to feel exactly what you're feeling and you're not alone. And the uncertainty, or swimming in the uncertainty piece, I love that image that comes up. And how challenging that can be for students, how uncertainty is anxiety producing or a fear space for a lot of people. And I mean, I see uncertainty as the status quo. It's how we live. And many of us don't like to live there, and we'll do whatever we can to not live there, but it is that reality. How do you talk to people about uncertainty?
So what I've been really curious about recently, and then many years ago as well, is this, I like to notice the ebb and flow. So when it comes to a creative practice specifically, so I'll share a brief little story. When I was doing my master's program years ago, it was right before my master's program. I was in Italy for a year. So I was painting and I got completely blocked. And that was my only job that I was doing there in Italy, was to paint and be, you know, this creative free spirit. And I got completely blocked.
Yeah.
And I noticed that, well, one of my professors said to me, you have to strike while the iron is hot. And I remember I would go to my studio space and I would sit, and then I would be completely blank and I would feel more frustrated because I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing to, you know, appease for my grades, and there was all this pressure. And I kept thinking about that, strike while the iron's hot. And I ended up leaving briefly for like a week or two to fly back to the States for holiday break. And I ended up seeing people I loved, and I had been really homesick, and I like read books and listened to music and got in nature, and I came back and it poured out of me. I created so much work. It was completely different from what I had been doing before, and it was like this floodgate. And so I mentioned that when you ask about uncertainty, because I think with the ebb and flow of creativity, sometimes it looks like something is completely dormant, and it reminds me of like winter when, you know, the trees aren't sprouting, but beneath the soil you have all these roots that are really rich and, you know, soaking up all the water and nourishment. And so with that uncertainty, I think sometimes looks can be deceiving. And so there's an author who I also love, Pema Chodron, and she says we call something good and we call something bad, but we just don't know. And so when something comes up in my life that I have a lot of uncertainty and I'm feeling anxious, I often will think about different moments in my life where I've thought that something was going wrong, or I had a perception about something and it ended up being completely different, or I felt stuck and then it switched. And I just think about the moments in my life when I've had movement, when it hasn't been completely stuck. Because for me, when I feel most overwhelmed with uncertainty is when I feel, you know, completely bound up by that uncertainty. So all of these ramblings that I'm sharing is just around having a shift in perspective and having more space for that uncertainty to just be there. And we might be surprised by what ends up sprouting or how things change.
Yeah. I love that. I love the story of Italy and that experience, and being surprised by what was happening and how it transformed. I think that's when we forget that transformation, we're not going to know what transformation is until it happens. That I think that's something that I end up holding on to. like, I know there's transformation that's coming and I don't know what it's going to look like. And can I embrace that and move with it or work with it as it's coming? Yeah.
Totally.
Nice.
I had a professor, I quote her all the time. She said to me, can I collaborate with chance? And I was doing these big abstract paintings and I wanted to know where they were going, you know, where they would end up and have this vision.
Yeah.
And part of the really beautiful piece of that practice is not knowing, like being surprised by what comes up. And so I often will think of that around uncertainty also as, can I collaborate with chance? And it seems to lighten it somehow for me also. Like there's this playfulness that can come in.
Yeah. And that you're not alone. That whenever I think of, can I collaborate with something, it means I'm not alone. And that feels less uncertain. In that, I love that. Can I collaborate with chance? I'm taking it. I'm gonna shake that phrase.
It's not mine. Yeah,
it's
spreading all over the world.
Well, this has been such a treat to chat with you. I just have one last question. What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
I love this question. I notice for me often when I'm in a really good flow and being creative, that my breath feels deeper, that I feel more of an opening through my front body, my chest area, my stomach. Because the opposite when I'm feeling really stuck is I tend to almost even fold over, like I come into myself to protect that front body. So just an opening and a deepness with my breath and feeling more relaxed and grounded and at home.
Oh, nice. I love all of these descriptions that people come up with and their physicality. I know we can't see it, but the physicality of expressing that front body space it's beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. If people want to learn more about the work you do, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is on my site at mindfulcreativemuse.com. And that will have links to all of my social media. And there's also articles and videos and books if you want to learn more about mindful art.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's been such a treat.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mari.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.